Good. Okay. Right. Well, welcome, Jenny. Privileged to have you speaking to us, Jenny Yates. On the call as well, we have Linda Rose, and as well as Linda, we have, who else have we got? Let me just see. We've got some visitors joining us from outside. We have an administrator, and we also have Will Jones, who's our other commissioner. So there's two commissioners and myself acting as chair today. And just to remind you what the process is, I know you know, but for those tuning in or listening in maybe, this is a commission for listening to the voice of Christians who would say that they've been discriminated against because of their Christian faith. And really the role and the purpose of this is purely to allow you to say your piece, to say what happened to you, and then for the commissioners who are taking part to ask questions. Again, it's not a cross-examination or anything like that, but just to clarify those things that you've said. If there are any details that we feel we need to elaborate on a little bit, well, that's what the process is all about. And then there'll be an opportunity for you at the end to say anything you want to close up with, and then we'll close the proceedings. As I say, there are some members of the public have joined in. The process will be recorded and is usually put up on YouTube, so it will be a public process from that point of view. So feel free to hold back any details that you want to, any explicit details that you want to hold back. That's absolutely fine. And we'll take it from there. So having said that, Jenny, thank you so much again for joining us. Perhaps we've read your documentation, extensive, detailed, and thank you so much for submitting that. Perhaps for those who are dialing in, listening in, perhaps you'd just like to briefly summarize what happened to you when it happened and where you are now.
Right, thank you very much for inviting me, Tony, and everybody else. Well, I was working as a hospital chaplain. This is quite a while ago, and I was part-time, but I also did some voluntary hours extra on the A&E department, because a patient I'd been talking to on the cardiac unit said, "Oh, you know where you ought to be? You ought to be in A&E on a Saturday night." So I, with the blessing of the senior chaplain, I started doing 4 hours per week from 8 p.m. to 12, supporting people in A&E. And this was in addition to my contracted hours. And this particular incident took place on the 31st of December 2012. It was at the time that the same-sex marriage bill was going through Parliament. And I met this lady. What are we calling her? Are we calling her Mrs. I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to use her initials or not.
I would be as ambiguous as
right.
as
okay.
You can,
well,
yeah.
I'll just call her Mrs. C.
Okay,
and so I was chatting to this lady. She was, telling me about her medical condition, her problems, and so on. And then she said she was worried about her daughter, because her daughter was at home on her own. So I said, "Well, how old's your daughter?" And she said 21. So I said, "Oh, well, why are you worried if she's 21? "Oh, because she suffers from anxiety. She was bullied at schools. She's transgender." And so we had some very friendly conversation about that. That wasn't really the problem. At least it wasn't at the time. Later, she tried to make it a problem. But then we got on to talking about this same-sex marriage bill. Now, I agree that that was not very sensible, because normally I avoid any conversation about controversial issues. For instance, I would never get into a theological discussion with a Jehovah's Witness or something like that. But she said she was been brought up Catholic, but she didn't practice anymore, but she still considers herself a Christian. And she was going on about, "Oh, it's all about love and equality." And I simply said that I didn't think it was necessary, because same civil partnerships already provide the same legal and financial rights. But she went on and on about it being about love and equality. And then I said, "Well, I'm afraid, I would go to prison before I'd conduct a same-sex wedding." And then, having all up to then, it'd been very friendly, very pleasant. She said, "Oh, well, it was okay. We could agree to disagree and so on." And that was all right. She didn't mind people having different opinions. But when I said I would go to prison before I'd conduct a same-sex wedding, she suddenly exploded and accused me of being homophobic, said I'd offended her, get out. Now, she had with her male partner, and then she turned to him. Oh, I stood up. I said, look, I'm very sorry. I'm sorry if I've offended you, but I'm not homophobic. She kept repeating that I was. And then she turned to her partner. She said, get a piece of paper, write her name down. I'm going to complain. So obviously that was a little worrying. So I again apologized, tried to apologize for offending her, but I said, I'm not homophobic. But I said, okay, well, I'll go. As I got to the door, I sort of turned around, and I think I was trying to lighten the situation. So I said, but you know, God created Adam and Eve, didn't he? Not Adam and Steve, or we wouldn't be here. And then I went out, closed the door. And then I got a piece of paper and immediately wrote down, you know, my recollection of events. She sent her partner out to the sister in charge, who went in and talked to them, came out and said to me, oh, you know, they may complain, they may not, but don't go back in. I said, it's fine. I wasn't intended to go back in. And then I continued for the rest of the time. And I knew the senior sister didn't ask me to go or anything like that. I continued talking to other patients. And then when the senior chaplain came back, he was on annual leave. I told him about it. And then this woman wrote a letter of complaint to the CEO. And her own admission, she didn't write it down for a fortnight. She wrote it a fortnight later. When my mind was clear, she said. Well, her recollection of events was somewhat different from mine. And she went on and on. She made up all sorts of things that, you know, it was terribly homophobic, very offensive. It was all extremely emotional, the way she expressed her complaint. And where do we go from there? Hang on. Yeah, the CEO wrote a letter back to her, offering her apologies from me and the senior chaplain, because, you know, I was very sorry to upset anybody. I was there to try and, you know, relieve people's stress, not cause it. And I hadn't intended any offence. But she wrote this letter, where she was written back to with apologies. She wouldn't accept them. She flatly refused to. There were various phone conversations held. She had a conversation with the senior chaplain in which she said, oh, I consider myself a Christian, but I'm not going to forgive her because she's obviously homophobic. And she claimed in her letter and in other places that it was only the Adam and Eve comment that she'd found offensive. So really, she was basically lying, because she'd already accused me of being homophobic several times before I made the Adam and Eve comment. And I only made that in a kind of self-defense to try and, you know, lighten the atmosphere. So basically, she flatly refused to accept an apology. But then she did say to the CEO in a letter that she was happy to try and seek a resolve, as she called it. I think she means a resolution. So we arranged a meeting. This is sometime later. A meeting was arranged with her and her partner and the senior chaplain and the deputy director of nursing, who is the senior chaplain's line manager. So we had this meeting, and after the sort of introductory pleasantries, thanking them for coming, etc., the senior chaplain was chairing it, and the deputy director of nursing was taking notes. And the senior chaplain then asked Mrs. C if she were willing to accept an apology, because she'd given the impression that she was willing to accept it if it was offered in person. So he said, was she willing to accept an apology? She said, and then she turned to me and she said, no, because you're not really sorry. You're only sorry I reported you. So just, you know, basically, how do you respond to that? She's put an end to any meaningful discussion just like that. And the senior chaplain totally failed to ask, well, why did she not think I was sincere? You know, how could an apology be offered that would, you know, convince her it was sincere? But then she went on and on and on, saying, you know, that at this encounter we'd had, that as soon as she told me she got a transgender daughter, there was a cooling of the atmosphere, which was simply not true. That I'd asked intrusive questions, which was something like, I mean, I asked, for instance, how old was this child when what she thought was a boy said he was a girl. I think she said aged 8 or so. And I said, had they already lived in the same place? So how had the neighbours responded to the change? That sort of question. I don't think that's overly intrusive. I did actually ask, had this daughter had any medical treatment or surgery? And she said, no, she's too young. Huh, interesting, at 21. She was 21. When you think, well, they say now, but at that point, and we actually agreed. We actually had a very pleasant conversation saying, yes, we agree that, you should be really careful before you do anything that's irreversible. So it was really all agreement until we got onto the same-sex marriage bit. So then she tried to claim at this so-called reconciliation meeting that that there was this cooling in the atmosphere. And then she claimed that I'd quoted from the Bible twice, which I hadn't. And when she was asked, well, what had I quoted or what was it about? She couldn't remember. Well, of course she couldn't, because I hadn't quoted the Bible. I didn't mention the Bible till I was going out of the door. Anyway, this meeting ended up failing to achieve its purpose. And I was blamed for it, basically, because I challenged some of the things she said that were simply untrue. But because I wasn't sort of kowtowing and and I don't know. Anyway, it was after that the deputy director of nursing then told me that because this woman had refused to accept an apology, there had to be a disciplinary hearing. And that she gave me that as the reason. And I read all the obviously they gave me all the disciplinary policy stuff, pages and pages and pages of it. And it actually talked about staff being treated fairly. So I said, well, hang on, if two patients or their relatives are offended, and then one receives an apology and they accept it, that's fine, that's the end of the matter. The other one doesn't accept it, then the person who's being complained about has to face a disciplinary hearing. How is that treating people fairly and justly? It isn't. But nobody answered me. I could never get any sensible answers from anybody about all the things I asked. So then, say the DDN said there'd got to be a disciplinary investigation. She said, first of all, not hearing, investigation to start with. And she appointed what they call an investigation officer, who was a nursing sister. Well, I was told all the time they were going to keep this as short as possible, do it as fast as possible to avoid stress, etc., etc., etc. Because the DDN then said I had to be suspended. Now, I'd been working for 4 months. 4 months had gone by between the original incident and when she told me I had to be suspended. So that was May. Now we've reached the beginning of May. And I queried why this was necessary when I'd been working for the last 4 months and nobody had seen me as a dangerous threat, but now all of a sudden I become a dangerous threat to vulnerable people. Because this complainant said, oh, I wouldn't want her near, my daughter, or she's a threat to LGBT people. I had assured her actually that I'd had encounters with gay and lesbian people, and I'd recently had an encounter with a transgender patient who had even sent me a card thanking me for my care, but she wouldn't accept any of it. She just thought I was, a terrible threat. So I say I was now to be suspended and this investigation was started. Well, it took her a month before she even appointed the investigation officer, probably because it was difficult to find somebody, I suppose. And this woman, well, she was supposed to be unbiased, but I'm afraid she wasn't. She only interviewed the complainant on the phone. She didn't even interview a person face to face. I don't think she challenged her about any of these false accusations that she'd made. She just accepted her word. She felt, sympathetic. Okay, the lady was not well, but, I just felt she was biased from the start. The senior chaplain was also interviewed. And at first he was supportive. At first he said he didn't think I was homophobic. But then he started dragging up these things from the past, which I mentioned in the book. For instance, in my file, there was a previous allegation of a homophobic comment, which was completely false. And it was a lady that I'd seen in the day centre at the hospice. And I'd seen her, 3 or 4 times. She was a lovely Christian lady. And she shared with me that her son was gay. And that she and her late husband had a bit of problem accepting it, but they had accepted it. They got on well with his partner and so on. And she shared all sorts of things about it. She was sad that she wouldn't be a grandmother, for instance, because he was an only child. And then I saw her as an inpatient, and she had a photograph of her late husband and this son and his partner on the bed table. And when I prayed for her, oh, that's right, they were going to come, the son and his partner were going to come to look after her. She was having a care package to go home, and they were going to come and look after her so she could, die at home. So when I prayed with her. She said she was a Christian. I prayed for them in the way you would expect, for that sort of situation. But then the son complained that when his mother had told me he was gay, I'd said, "Oh, don't worry, prayer can heal people like that." Well, I hadn't said anything of the kind. I don't know where he got the idea from. I can only assume that she'd said I'd prayed for him and he got the wrong end of the stick. Or perhaps he'd had a bad experience, of people trying to pray away the gay or something before. But I certainly did not say anything of the kind. And at the time, it was a different senior chaplain then, because this was a few years earlier. He believed me. That was the end of the matter, so I thought. But when this new thing arose, the now senior chaplain found this on my file, and he told the investigating officer wrote in her notes that he had provided proof of a previous homophobic comment. Well, there was no proof. There was only an allegation. It was completely unsubstantiated. And there were other things like that. And he dragged a couple of other really, really silly things. That somebody had rung him, an unidentified person. Well, I think I know who it was, but somebody had rung him and said I had heckled a young speaker at a Quaker meeting. Well, what had that got to do with my work? Nothing at all. I hadn't heckled her anywhere, but two witnesses that say I didn't heckle her. I simply asked a challenging question that she couldn't answer. But so it was nothing to do with my work. I suspect it was her mother who complained. And then there was another one. Somebody else that he said was described as a pastoral visitor, I think it was, had rung up and said, "Oh, that my work with healing on the streets might adversely affect my work as a chaplain." No evidence that it had, just that it might, and he'd never discussed this with me. He'd never discussed either of these cases with me. And yet all this was sort of submitted as evidence against me. It was unbelievable, really. Anyway, eventually this investigation was finished. It took months, I say. Oh, and all this time, excuse me, I need to get a drink.
You take your time.
All this time, I was supposed to be given an update on what was happening every week. And I've documented 4 times when that didn't happen. And the worst was when there was 36 days without me hearing a word from the DDN. So over 5 weeks. And also the suspension was supposed to be reviewed every fortnight. And again, I've got documented long gaps when it wasn't. So this just went on and on and on and on. All the blurbs said, "Oh, we try to keep it as short as possible. We're trying to sort it out to reduce the stress." It was eventually September before they'd finished this investigation. And then the DDN decided that there needed to be a disciplinary hearing, and I was to be accused of gross professional misconduct for making a homophobic comment. Now, gross professional misconduct was usually things like being drunk on duty, theft, assault, that sort of thing. So I thought this is absolutely ridiculous. What one little comment or a woman who flatly refuses to accept an apology even when it's offered. And so eventually this disciplinary hearing was called. I was permitted to have with me either a representative of a trade union, well, I didn't belong to a trade union, or a friend, but not professional legal help. However, I happen to have met the wonderful Andrea Minikilo Williams and her team. I mean, Adia Muba had been with me at one point to help me. But they sent me Sharon Lamb, who is legally trained but was acting in a voluntary capacity. So therefore, that was permissible. So that was very helpful. And they also had to bring in a senior chaplain from another trust as in an advisory capacity. He didn't actually contribute to the decision making, but he was to advise. And I was given the notification of the date for the hearing, which was in late September, early October in 2013. We've reached now, so this has been going on, 9 months. And I was given 1 day's notice when I was to get my staff side, my side submitted. And then on appeal, I was given another couple of days by the what do you call it? Not occupational health. What's the other word? Not occupational health. The other one, personal.
HR.
Whatever. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, yes, yeah, so it put me under terrible stress because I'd booked to go away for a weekend or something. And, they took allowance for the other people having holidays, but not me. So I eventually got this in, and say this it was like being put on trial, really, with the prosecution counsel, which was the DDN and the investigating officer. And the investigating officer had obviously, she tried to act as prosecuting counsel, judge, jury, and executioner. She wasn't unbiased at all. She just decided I was guilty. In fact, at one point, the chair of the panel even had to say, "Excuse me, that's our decision, not yours." That's how bad she was. They misquoted me the whole time. For instance, they said, that I would rather die than conduct a same-sex wedding. They talked about my aversion to same-sex marriage, not opposition. They just deliberately used very emotive language to make it seem as bad as possible. And the really dreadful thing was that we weren't allowed to call the patient herself, so we could cross-examine her. I'm thinking, in a court of law, in a criminal case, you're considered innocent unless proved guilty, and you can call the chief prosecution witness to cross-examine them. But we couldn't call her. Oh no, that would cause her too much stress. If we'd been able to, we could have perhaps exposed all her lies, her exaggerations, her everything else, because she said, for instance, you see, originally she was trying to claim. Originally she accused me of being homophobic, I say over and over again, before I made the Adam and Eve comment. But then she tried to claim that was what had offended her. So she changed her story. It was the Adam and Eve comment that offended her. Oh, no, I'm happy to have, people can have their different opinions and so on and so forth. But we couldn't really cross-examine it. She'd also accused me initially of saying that I'd gone right out of the door, right out and closed the door, and then opened the door again to make the Adam and Eve comment, which was not true. And eventually she did admit actually that wasn't true in one of the letters to the senior chaplain or a phone conversation with him, I forget which. But nobody would believe me when I said, look, I wrote it all down immediately. She wrote it down after a fortnight. Her memory was completely wrong. I mean, I can prove it another way, because she said that I'd offered them a cup of tea. Well, I didn't offer them a cup of tea because we were not allowed to offer cups of tea until they'd been seen by a doctor and it was okay. So, I could prove that her memory was completely skew-whiffy. She remembered what she wanted to remember, really, and not what I'd said. So anyway, at the end of this, we had 1 day, then there was a break, and we had to have a second day of this hearing. So all this wasted hours and hours and hours of time, thousands of pounds, reams of paper, over this one stupid little thing. I felt it was like taking not a sledgehammer to crush a nut, but a steamroller to crush a snail. It was really so ridiculous. And then eventually, sometime a few days later, they came back and said I was guilty of misconduct, but not gross misconduct. Because if it had been gross professional misconduct, I would have been sacked on the spot and possibly even put on the register for the protection of vulnerable adults, which would have been absolutely dreadful, to ruin everything I do. Well, thankfully, that didn't happen. But even then, it took them ages to sort out when I was coming back. The disciplinary panel Hello.
Hi, we're still here.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
is that
computer,
okay?
my computer just like funny then. Um,
Okay.
um,
You were talking about the disciplinary panel and after the judgment of misconduct, not gross misconduct, and you were summing up where it got to and where you are now.
I think Jen is frozen again
Oh,
too.
has she frozen again? Oh yes, yeah,
Yeah.
or deep in thought, but I think you're probably
No,
right.
she's the connection seems to have frozen.
Yes. Oh well, that's a little bit awkward, isn't it? Does anybody have her telephone number?
I think I do.
I suggest, yes, just give her a call. Ask her to maybe dial up again. We can always.
She's coming back in. She's coming
Oh,
back in.
okay.
hello.
Hello,
Hello, Jenny.
Hello,
Hello, Jenny.
hello,
You disappeared, or somebody disappeared.
hello.
That's all right. You're back connected now. We can hear you.
Yeah,
Can't see you at the moment, but
Oh, right.
that's
Oh,
all right. Don't worry. Just take
oh,
your
hang on,
time.
if I click that. Right, yeah.
Oh
There
yeah,
you
we've
are.
got you back.
That's
There we
That's
are.
fine. That's
Fantastic.
Right,
fine.
okay,
So,
sorry, where was I?
well, we lost
yeah,
you.
yeah, we were on the second day, yeah. Oh no, the verdict, yes.
That's right.
A written warning that was to last for 12 months, and I was not to be able to work on A&E. And then the senior chaplain and the deputy director of nursing decided that they were also going to ban me from the medical assessment unit and the psychiatric unit, where I'd had some of my most, fruitful pastoral conversations. So I was to be put in other areas. But the whole thing was unworkable anyway, because I did on-call duties, right? We had chaplains in the hospital, sort of office hours, Sunday mornings, but then we were always somebody on call 24 hours a day. But then if I were banned from certain areas, if I were on call, then there'd have to be another chaplain, to cover for if there was a call from those places. And then how was it going to be explained to them? Because nobody was supposed to know why I was off sick. In fact, if I can just go back a minute to something that was really difficult, there was a dear lady called Anne who was in and out of the psychiatric unit every now and then, and she was a Christian, and I saw her quite often, and we had a very good relationship. But on one occasion, she was admitted when I was on suspended, and the senior chaplain went to see her, and she asked why I hadn't been to see her. So he said, "Oh, she's off sick." Well, then this lady was allowed out for a morning when I was doing healing on the streets in town. And she came across and met me, and she said, "Oh, I thought you were off sick." What? So it puts you in a very, very difficult position. That he had to lie in order to cover. Anyway, yes, so I was banned from those areas. That would make it impossible for on call. And in the end, the whole thing was so difficult that I felt I had to hand in my notice. I mean, I was old enough to retire, so in that sense, it wasn't absolutely dreadful, but I had intended going on for a couple more years, just part-time work. And what really grieved me, I think, was, all the people who missed out on care while I was suspended, because there weren't enough other people to go around. There were only a small number of chaplains and volunteers. And then the fact that I was considered to be, having spent most of my working life in caring professions of one kind or another. I was a nurse and a midwife before I trained to be a pastor. So I spent most of my working life looking after vulnerable people, and then to be treated as somebody who's a dangerous threat was very hurtful. And I also felt hurtful that the senior chaplain who had, say, started off agreeing that I wasn't homophobic, then almost seemed like he was trying to get rid of me, which was very sad. And I just, the other thing that grieved me was this ridiculous waste of money.
Yeah. I don't know, have you frozen or are you still there? I think Jenny's frozen. Oh, there you are.
I was going to say something else and I forgot what it was.
Well, perhaps Jenny,
ask me questions.
Yeah, we'll draw more out maybe.
Yeah.
But first of all, thank you very much for that elucidating summary. I think anyone listening in knows exactly what's going on now, which is great.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. Yes, I think the authorities were frightened that this woman was going to go to the press.
Right.
Yeah, and I think they were falling over backwards to make it clear that they would not tolerate any breach of their equality and diversity policy.
Right, right. And let's just remind people listening in that you're not a surgeon or a
No.
nurse. You were there in your capacity as a chaplain.
Yes.
Somebody a Christian chaplain, let's emphasize.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just bear that in mind when we look at some of the comments and the assertions about the things you said, because I think that's relevant. I've got one or two questions, but before I ask mine, let's see if they're covered by other people, and we'll go to Linda first, if that's okay. Linda, would you like to follow anything up?
Yes, thank you, Jenny. I just a couple of questions, but really, I just looking for clarification on things. Not intended to be facetious, although this might sound a bit facetious, but this lady talked about her daughter.
Yeah.
It's transgender.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that the child was born a boy or born a girl?
Born male, born a boy.
Born male. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And I used the female name, chosen a female, and female pronouns and all that. I mean, the transgender thing wasn't quite such a huge issue 10 years ago as it's since become. So yeah, I just use the female name, and I refer to her as she. Yeah.
Okay. And had she received treatment at the Tavistock, do you know, or was she receiving some sort of treatment at the hospital where you were a chaplain?
I don't know. There was no mention of the Tavistock. What her mother said was that she was very anxious. She didn't go out without her mother. She'd been bullied at school. She hadn't got any friends. I think I asked if she'd got any friends. No, not really. And she wouldn't. I have evidence that she wouldn't even go to the GP without her mother. In fact, I have evidence from what the patient shared with the DDN at the so-called reconciliation meeting after I'd been asked to leave, that she'd had trouble. Her own GP had refused to see her unless it was an emergency because, well, there'd obviously been some trouble. Let's put it like that.
Yes,
which is interesting.
It is interesting, and one can appreciate that the mother would have felt very concerned with the whole situation. Was she a controlling mother, do you think, or I mean, what was her relationship, do you think, with her child?
I really don't know. I couldn't say. I mean, I never met the child, the daughter, obviously.
Yeah, well, just as a feeling, it's a very complex situation here.
Oh yeah, yes.
Just
sorry. One of the things the mother said in one of these letters was that when I'd said I didn't agree with the same-sex wedding, wouldn't conduct a same-sex wedding, she said, "Oh, I made her feel as if her daughter should never have been born." Well, to me, that's really a reflection of her own guilt feelings, I think, about having a transgender child. I mean, I never for a minute suggested that it was her fault in any way at all. So it wasn't that we fell out over at the time or disagreed over at the time. It was the same-sex wedding thing.
Well, I guess when one touches a wound, there's often a disproportionate reaction. So I can understand that, I think. But just looking at the hospital, what was the general policy at the time? Did they have a really strong inclusivity and diversity policy? And how far did this extend to Christian inclusivity?
Well, I mean, I can't remember the exact wording now, but the usual sort of stuff about treating people equally. I mean, it was an area where there weren't that many immigrants, so all the chaplains were Christian. There was the full-time senior chaplain who was Church of England. There was a part-time Church of England. There was me, who was the part-time Free Church chaplain, and there was the Catholic priest who was part-time Catholic. Buddhists and the rest of them. Sorry,
we keep losing you, Jenny. So I keep.
Oh, well, you froze just then.
I froze.
Yeah, on my screen you did. Right.
Okay. Within the team itself,
Yeah.
the chaplaincy team, did you feel that you were on the same sort of playing field as them in your views doctrinally, or did you feel there was a real mix of approach towards this, the issues of inclusivity and diversity?
I don't think it was anything we really discussed. I mean, I would have thought that the senior chaplain would have shared my views, but he never actually said one way or the other.
Hmm. That's interesting. But when the issue came up, it sounds like he was distinctly unsupportive of you.
Yeah, well, he was. Yeah. And I think it was probably to protect himself, really.
Hmm.
I mean, on the whole, I would have said he was a good chaplain.
But that clearly would have left you feeling a bit betrayed, I would imagine.
Yeah.
The fact that he
Well, yeah, I did.
hadn't supported you. And the others on the team, did they know the precise issues at this point, or were they being kept in the dark, the complaints against you?
Well, I assume they didn't know. I mean, I never discussed it with them because I didn't meet them.
Right.
I mean, we didn't normally meet anyway because we would do different shifts. We would be on at different times.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Did the hospital have that any obvious connections with Stonewall?
I don't know. I have no idea. I think somebody fairly high up was gay. Not the CEO. That was a lady. She wasn't. I think she was. Well, as far as I know, heterosexual. There was somebody else. I can't remember what role he did play now, but I think there was somebody who was gay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's all for the moment, Tony. So do.
All right. Thank you, Linda. Will, what would you like to ask?
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for talking to us today. I was wondering if you did you, because it was an employment situation, wasn't it? not a voluntary situation. Was following the outcome, were you advised not to challenge it in any way and take it further, or was that, or did you decide to do that just in order to try to bring the situation to a close?
I decided not to appeal against the decision because I just wasn't going to put myself through any more of this stress. Had it been like I was desperately needed to keep the employment to pay the mortgage or something like that, then I might have done. Or if they'd found gross professional misconduct, I would have probably appealed because of what that might have done to any future involvement I had in a church or anything else. But as it wasn't, as it was just misconduct, not gross misconduct, I thought I can't put up with this anymore. It's just too stressful. What's the point?
Thank you. And were you given any advice either way, let's say from the Christian Legal Centre or elsewhere? You don't have to say where the advice came from.
No, I don't think that they advised me one way or the other. I'm sure they would have supported me had I decided to appeal.
I was just wondering if you were given an indication of the strength of your case because obviously you accepted the finding. So, but you didn't. But do you think that the finding was? This may seem a silly question, but do you think the finding was fair, or do you think that actually the finding was unfair and in law? I mean, and do you think that you may have been able to challenge it successfully had you had the desire to do that?
Oh, I don't know. You'd have to ask the Christian Legal Centre whether I could have successfully appealed. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that sort of thing, so I don't know.
Thank you. And with hindsight, which is obviously a wonderful thing, do you think that you would have done anything differently in the situation that occurred initially, or do you think that you would? Yeah.
Well, I think yes. I agree. I probably was not.
frozen again. Oh, yeah. Here we are.
Oh dear.
We just
Yep,
lost
you're
you
back.
momentarily
Go on.
there,
I know. I
Jenny.
don't. Well, is it my area? Must be me.
Don't worry, don't worry. It's fine.
It's probably just internet connection somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't usually do this when I do other Zoom meetings.
Don't worry, it's fine.
Sorry, what was the question? Oh yeah, yes. I mean, yes. I probably should have avoided talking about a controversial subject. I agree, but they say the lady seemed quite friendly and happy to, you know, share our different opinions. She didn't show any signs of wanting to end the conversation, and I can usually pick that up, you know, if they do.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Jenny, thank you so much again. This is really, really informative, your responses. I'm curious, did they ask to see you, this couple, or did you just happen to come across them?
Oh, I just happened to come across them. I would
Right.
go around the A&E and see who was there, and did they want to chat?
And they knew you were a minister of the Christian religion.
Yeah, I was wearing a
effectively.
dog collar.
Yeah. Oh, so fairly indicative.
I hate dog collars, but it was
say.
a uniform, so you had to wear it,
Yeah.
so people knew who you were. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then you said sorry in
Yes.
your initial meeting.
Yes.
What were you apologizing for?
Well, I'm sorry if I've upset you.
Right. So you weren't apologizing for holding your beliefs or saying that in fact you didn't hold them and you rejected them.
Oh,
You
no,
were just apologizing that your beliefs had caused her upset.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so when she thought your apology wasn't genuine, am I to infer from that actually she thought you were glad that you'd offended her because of your beliefs in that case?
Oh, I don't know.
What was she rejecting in your apology? You said it wasn't genuine.
She said she didn't believe that it was sincere.
Right. Yeah. So basically she was saying, no, you did mean to offend me by saying what you said.
Well,
I'm guessing.
Well, I presume so, yes.
Yeah.
She was just determined. She said in one of her letters or phone calls, I'm going to take this as far as I can. She is clearly homophobic.
Yeah, but you've indicated that the dismissal process was followed simply because she rejected your apology. So it seems to me quite important what your apology was and what her rejection of it meant. So that's quite interesting. And then I'm still not clear in my own head. Maybe you're not neither. What exactly you were dismissed for? I mean, I get the Adam and Steve comment, but it's factually correct. God didn't create Adam and Steve. Yeah. So is she annoyed at the fact? I'm just trying to...
Right.
What exactly were you dismissed for? For offending somebody? For expressing your Christian views? I'm not sure what they dismissed you for.
Well, the DDN described the Adam and Steve comment as a homophobic joke.
Right. So
I was accused of making a homophobic joke.
Right. So
in my defense at the hearing, I pointed out, I said, look, whether you believe Adam and Eve were a real couple or they're just symbolic or whatever, whether you believe in a direct creation or evolution or whatever, human beings are designed that it takes a man and a woman to procreate. Therefore, what I said was simply a biological fact.
Yes.
It wasn't said as a joke, it was a fact. And I said it's no more homophobic than if you say to a black person that they're more likely to suffer from rickets and lack of vitamin D if they live in a cool country. That's not racist. So what I said was no more homophobic than that would be racist. And I pointed out also that at the time there were some gay and lesbian people who were actually themselves opposed to same-sex marriage. Because I actually found something on the internet about, gays opposed to same-sex marriage. Because, and I said, if they're opposed to it, are they homophobic? How can I be homophobic for saying I'm against same-sex marriage if some same-sex people, homosexual people are against it? It's ridiculous. But it didn't go down with them. They wouldn't have that.
So you also spoke extensively about some other spurious claim which wasn't in the end brought into the process.
Yes, yes.
But had they heard about it anyway?
Yes. Oh, yes, yes, yes. All
So
this stuff about these
right.
other silly so-called complaints or so on, but that all went into the hearing panel had all that information. Yeah.
Right, so they so it's very difficult for them to say they hadn't considered it when in fact they'd heard, spurious claims which were never proven. And the idea that praying away the gay, or whatever the phrase I think it was you used, and there are indeed Christians who are formally homosexual, so it is possible that people change their sexuality, and in fact many do according to the evidence. But yeah,
but
so
I never said anything about praying for him and anything to do with him being gay.
But somebody else had brought that into the hearing from years previously, etc. Very interesting. Okay, well that's so from my point of view, I'm not sure why you were dismissed, or the veracity of it, or is it because you believed what you believed, or because you expressed what you believed, or because you did it in a rhyming couplet? I'm not entirely sure what went on there. But that's just the other two, Linda and Will. Have you got any follow-up questions, first of all, based on what you've heard?
Only to clarify that I think I might say Jenny wasn't dismissed. Is that right?
No, I wasn't dismissed. No, I wasn't dismissed.
Right. Oh, that's you had a warning, a final written warning.
I was given a final written warning to last for 12 months and banned from working on A&E.
Right. Okay.
And then had further.
And then the senior chaplain of the DBN added the two other areas I wasn't working.
Management.
Yeah.
Effectively, it's constructive dismissal because you felt you had to leave because you couldn't do your work.
Yeah, which is what I was trying to get implying earlier, was that perhaps there was a case for constructive dismissal, or if even if you accept the outcome of the conduct review.
Thanks, Will. Anything else, Will?
No, not at this point.
Okay, Linda, anything else to follow up on?
That was the exact point I was going to bring up, that the restrictions were in effect constructive dismissal, because they really did seem to be making it impossible for you to carry out your role. So in a sense, it's a great shame that they weren't challenged on that, because I suspect you would have won at an employment tribunal. I still feel from your evidence some concern about the hospital's approach to issues of faith, because it seems very much that they, in being so inclusive for LGBT, that they are denying the possibility for expression of sincerely held belief. But this was never an issue for them, I'm guessing, from all the evidence that you've given, and was never defended by the chaplaincy team.
No. I mean, at the time,
the accusation that you quoted the Bible twice is quite interesting, because again, you're a Christian minister. What exactly is the accusation associated with quoting the Bible? How is that a bad thing if you're a Christian minister?
But I hadn't done it anyway. I had not quoted the Bible, apart from the Adam and Eve right at the end. I had not quoted the Bible to that point. And one of her things, she said that I'd said, "Oh, it's not a matter of opinion; it's what the Bible teaches." But I hadn't said that.
But it would be a reasonable thing for you to have said.
Yeah, precisely.
In the position as a Christian chaplain, which I think is the point Tony is bringing out here.
Especially as a woman claims to be a Christian, even though she wasn't practicing going to church or anything.
Did you when you decided to leave, did you take any advice from the Christian Legal Centre or anyone to about challenging the situation, or did you decide you wanted to?
No, I just handed in my notice.
And
I had a nice letter from the chaplain thanking me for my service. Ha ha ha. And my most recent appraisal before all this took place was sort of glowing, you know.
Yeah, you mentioned.
I've got it here.
Yeah. Anything else, Jenny, that you want to add? Any other comments that you feel you've not expressed that you want to, or any follow-ups to the questions that we've asked, or anything?
I'm just looking. I've got all my documentation out here.
Yeah. I mean, don't feel you have to state or dot all the I's and cross the T's. But for the public, we just wanted a summary.
Yeah.
But anything else that any pertinent details that you feel you want to bring in, or anything else? You talk about your mental health, and you say, well, actually, it did affect you for a while, but in fact, it's made you stronger.
Well, yeah. Well, and it's also made me very sympathetic to other people who are going through worse than this, whose lives are really messed up because, you know, they've got a family, they've got a mortgage that I can survive without. You know, I've got a pension. So it wasn't financially stressful, even though I would have, say, gone and worked in a couple more years part-time had I been able to, but no.
Well, any final comments from Linda or Will? No. Well, sorry, Linda.
Thank you